Interesting? Oh. Now back to the serious news. There was once a wondrous land through which ran a mighty river, and some of those who lived nearby began to believe that it would be a good thing to build levees and dams to direct and control its flow. So they tried. But the task proved more difficult than they had ever imagined, and even their best present efforts produced less than spectacular results. And most of them soon abandoned actual work on the project. Yet they all continued to periodically think about it. The future is always with man, in that he forever feels its stirring. It is by the mind that reality to man has become both more real and less real. And once you understand this, you no longer have any cause to ever speak or think the word reality. Cause, you see, you're sort of back home again, even though for the first time. And to be back home, even by such surrealistic definition, is to be in a place where no comment is required, where your mere presence is all that need be said. Such then is the operational relationship between the more conscious and what others call reality. They are in it, same as everyone else, but not same as everyone else. They unconditionally recognize it as home. What well-mannered child has tales to tell of his family? There was once a man who discovered something very little known, and when he decided he'd talk about it, he realized that his potential audience would be quite limited. So in the beginning, he had prefaced all his remarks by noting how small and exclusive were the numbers of people interested in and able to hear of matters such as he was prepared to reveal. But after some time along this line, he began to fear that his prophecies were becoming self-fulfilling. So he changed his approach and began to introduce his comments by saying that the subject at hand was one of significance and importance to all people. And yet, the numbers of those practically interested remained about the same. Moral: if they're not nude dancers and free beer, forget it. And if you're surprised at this, have a beer and doubly forget it. Routine existence provides its own forms of excitement and entertainment, which is about all that collective humanity is equipped to enjoy. Anything beyond that is unexpected, unnecessary, and difficult to discern, with its survival always in the hands of but a few. A religion that never went anywhere. I mean, it never even got off the ground. That's the title. What it did was to go around cutting people down from galluses. And if you're getting as perceptive as you should be, you realize this applies not to just religion, but to all general aspects of what men think of as their civilizations. The prime ingredient for the conveyance of information is repetition. Repetition. Oh, I'm sorry. Did you say that the prime ingredient for the did you say the prime ingredients for the conveyance of information or for civilization? Civilization. Very funny. Another look at the stickiness of the situation. If sheep did have the unrealized potential to fly, how could you ever direct their interest there too without first going through a process of making them feel less than adequate just being sheep? Ergo, the titillation many enjoy in their dreams of harsh, accusatory, mystical disciplines wherein, they imagine, men are made to properly feel guilty and ashamed at a new and higher level. As if indeed this might drive sheep to fly. Don't forget, however, that for every glue there is a solvent. Update and showdown time at the proverb corral. You can fool some of the people all the time and all the people some of the time, but if you're life, you can fool all the people all the time, including those who make up proverbs. See, the problem was that someone told Doc Holliday not to look into the sun when he drew his gun. When the truth of the matter is that under the normal conditions you find around these here parts, if you look off in any direction, you're a dead man. There is nothing to ever be learned or gained from following anyone or anything down a road that diminishes and demeans man, which in turn will always be one that embraces, even glorifies, those aspects less than manly. One group decided they'd expose a certain mystic, but all they were able to do was take his clothes off. Moral: you can't hide that which people are already unable to see. See? One man was finally able to strip his own mind and personality, and you think he was embarrassed? Hey, get real. Credo for routine existence: a day with no thoughts of illness is a day not fully lived. Through certain mental and verbal maneuvers do men attempt to distance themselves from their past and aspects of its influence on the present which they find unacceptable. This is done primarily by identifying action that is condemnable as being separate from the actor. Thus do men secretly strive to distinguish their instinctive self from their mental. If the majority of those who claim to be interested in things mystical do not hear it spoken of in terms either spiritual or related to self-improvement, they don't feel as though they've actually heard it spoken of. Another peek at the confining binary in the alternative construction of man's mental expectations. Some prophecies are said to be self-fulfilling, when in fact, except for those which aren't, all are. Maybe some of you should turn your hearing aids to fast. Allegro. There was once a race of creatures who lived on a purple planet, but due to the physical structure of their eyes, they could not naturally see the color purple. But one day, one of them finally did discern the color of their world, but when he attempted to tell the others what he had seen, well, let's just say this: it's a good thing he didn't give up his day job. One way to keep horses at home without fences, pens, or corrals is to make them feel guilty. Would-be mystics are most excited about the idea of the secret when they're 20. Then they become more focused on finding it when they're 30. Then they become more determined in their search when they're 40. And by the time they're 50, most of them, regardless of what they say, have joined the ranks of the resigned and defeated. And looking back on how they began, it's almost enough to make one say, sad but true. Except that should you do so, you'd be dangerously close to joining them. Well, if the race is not to the swift nor the strong, then who to? Well, obviously to the idiots who continue to run the damn thing long after its meaningless nature has become clear to everyone else. Even while at routine levels, repetition is a sorry handmaiden to the status quo, at the transcendental there is a certain quite crude, most effective power to perseverance. None can be called heroic who surrender at an early age, who give up at the first sign that the battle cannot be won as then perceived. The last man standing inside of a man is the mystical, triumphant warrior. Under ordinary conditions, the growth of the mind is a ball of string made larger and larger and larger. How to stay sick and minimize the possibility of unwanted assistance in getting better. First off, of course, is to take your sickness seriously. Secondly, is to believe resolutely that it is you who is sick. And lastly, is to never ever ponder any relationship between your sickness and your sensation of having an individual personality. It's hard to stir up excitement among the dead, and especially with those neurally so. And yet another note regarding the dichotomous restraints of routine mental perception. If the secret weren't so simple, it'd be complex. And then not the same secret. Dialogue for two. One guy had a little man who lived in his head. At least that's what he said. Who? The guy or the little man? He didn't say. Any mental reaction you have to the mental actions of other men is no more than an act of urination on a heap of dung. To struggle with and criticize the ideas flowing through ordinary men is to forever swim in a sea of tar. Or if you don't care for that metaphor, how about is to forever dine at the table of cannibals? The sound of the wind tells the more conscious nothing other than how the wind sounds. From a simple view, everyone's weak. And from a more complex one, none as weak as those who proclaim it. Another reason you see so few mystics wearing retainers on their teeth is because they long ago already bit off their tongue. Those laid out to rest, nearly dead while yet alive, always sense the future to be a place of disquiet and disorder. Hence ordinary men's distrust of tomorrow as they perceive it to be, leaving them grasping at the past and clinging to the present, at least to what minute portions they are able to imagine there be. And parallel to this, the unexpected enormity of the fused love for all things yet realized, and their total dissatisfaction with all things as is. Mental confinement and the efforts of some to break free. In his attempt to escape from his prison, one man changed its mailing address. Thinking fast when they came to repossess his car, this one man offered them his feet instead. While art studies dreams, and religion studies fears, and science studies things, and psychology studies itself, who is left to study man but the mystics? Which, of course, ultimately is to say, who else really wants to? After reading and hearing about such things for years, one man finally located a mystic and asked him, "What's the big deal with all this stuff you people are involved with?" And the mystic replied, "Damn if I know." First came the universe, which imagined it had a mind. Then came man with a mind who imagines there is a universe. And now for a simple fact that is continually overlooked. Everyone is smarter than a mystic. The plan was to pick back up on what we were discussing the last couple of times about how man in his present condition to continue to press on in the manner now established must separate what he perceives to be condemnable action from the actor. And in preparation thereof, I wrote several news items tonight, as you may or may not have noticed along the way, but there has been a grave change of plan. I've decided instead, I'll do it next time, to mention something a little more specifically. And that is, throughout all of this, if it is not changing the way, if it's not changing what you are, if it does not change the way you think and the way you feel, it's actually just a waste of time, which I know is pretty crude. If it does not change what you are to you, then you have missed it. Or if you like it another way, if it has not affected you as you perceive you to be, then it has not worked correctly. So somewhere in all of that, you can take your choice. Saying on the basis, for instance, we're now past 1,500 hour-long tapings of me standing here talking about this. I have a not inconsiderable amount of writing that has been passed around in this country and elsewhere over the last number of years. And yet it's not about me talking, and it's not 1,500 hours worth of my comments. And it is not observations about life. It is not talk. If it does not actually affect you, and you can't just look at me any more than you could be looking at anybody. When I say if it doesn't affect you, and you go, well, I've been waiting for you to whip the magic on me. All right, I'm as responsible as anybody. But the thing is, if you have lost sight of the fact, and I will take some responsibility for not grinding your nose in it all the time, of the fact that you're supposed to be doing something besides listening to me or anyone else, then we've missed the whole thing. So I was going to give you another kind of history that seems to have some effect sometimes, and remind you again that this is supposed to be about a man doing something. Let me give you another kind of history of people who get interested in this. And this has been true for thousands of years in Zen monasteries, in Hindu caves, people studying with a Hindu guru, people hidden out, devoting their life inside of a Christian or Jewish monastery, Sufis behind walled schools of all sorts, people nowadays chasing after some self-appointed spiritual teacher. Throughout all of this, regardless now of what the person or the organization that they may have been pursuing, regardless of that for the moment, I'm just going to talk to you about that which all of you have relived either in toto or in part yourself. As you start off looking for whatever this is, you find something. You find the immediate something that seems to offer some promise. If not in the beginning, you think, well, this has got to be it. And there's a great deal of excitement. What is never taken into consideration is, let's say that somewhere you located it or started reading about it between the ages of, let's say, 17 and 22 or so. There's an excitement that is almost impossible to ever recapture. There's an excitement that begins to diminish somewhere in your 20s. But what is never taken into consideration is that also your sexual drive begins to diminish with men around 22 into your 20s. The point is, there's an excitement about being alive, which I speak of the sex drive. You should be able to look past that. It is the vital energy of life itself, which manifests itself primarily in man and other creatures on our planet through the reproductive drive. What greater? You can be childish and dream that God, or the creator of the universe, has his spirit wandering around here. There are all kinds of mystical forces hanging out in certain mystical centers on this planet and all that stuff. But there is no greater manifestation of life itself than life reproducing itself. That is the power of sex. That is why it is oftentimes by ordinary men is so worshipped, seems so fearful to them. It becomes a lot more than it actually is in men's minds and their imagination. But there is nothing, at the basic level, there is nothing stronger. There is nowhere to look. You can dream of gods and spirits and afterlives and Atlantis and awakened masters all you want to, but there is nothing confronting man. There is no experience that is any stronger than the drive of life itself to reproduce itself. And in our case, it's sex. So this excitement that is almost a one-time event, the fever pitch of it, as I'm saying this, 17 to 22 more or less. There's no magical figures. But that kind of excitement, if it were not directed, by the way, if you were not a would-be mystic and got tied up in this, and even if you did, it was not necessarily exclusive to this, but there's also the time that would-be artists, painters, musicians, ballerinas, whatever you were doing, the kind of excitement, the kind of feeling that you have discovered your reason for living, that you had dreams of how famous you would be, in the music scene or in the art world, and that kind of excitement. And it, of course, everybody that dreams that, we understand, there's only one out of a million that ever really that ever approaches their dreams, and even that's not the fact, because those who do, someone who is trying to be a musician, and they do end up with a hit record, they do end up in a hot band for several years, in other words, they do succeed, still that excitement diminishes along with the 900,999 who didn't ever accomplish anything in music, that dreamed it. The point is, it is not success that is the determining factor of how long they hold the excitement. The excitement peaks, it is hormonal, it is physical, it is not driven from here, and it starts going down. It goes down whether you're involved with trying to find the secret, the mystical secret of life, or whether you're attempting to become a famous author. Whether you're attempting whatever it is. But something approaching the creative. Something other than you just want to make a lot of money. But at any rate, back to what should be of interest to people in this. There is an excitement, and some people end up in a monastery that somebody will at an early age. 17 or 18, they read about, they stumble across books about Sufism, let's say. And so they pack up, they move to Pakistan, they move to India, Afghanistan, or whatever. They find out there's supposedly a secret lodge in Paris. Let's say that they actually go to a more exotic place. They get to Pakistan, they wander around, they go through several people's hands, they stumble here and there, and they end up in what, once they ask if it's a Sufi school, they say yes, and so they end up there. Or they end up in the Zen monastery, which is less difficult to find in Japan. They go there at the age of 17 or 18, extremely excited that I have found it, and so happy that, and probably someone at the school or lodge would at least make some mention that it is beyond the norm for someone their age to be there. And they might even infer that you're lucky. Whoever says this to them at the lodge, if somebody did, it would be strictly off the record. But somebody told them, they might say that their whole life is tied up now in that particular school and how delighted they are to be there. And then they might just sort of sotto voce say, but boy, you are lucky. You're how old, 18? It was 35 before I got here. Or I was 50 before I got here. And they go, you are. What I'm pointing out, it is not the norm for someone at that age when they are at the height of that kind of excitement to even get there. But if they did, the excitement, even being there, would diminish at about the same rate as it would were they still sitting back in Dayton, Ohio, reading books in the library and just wondering if there's still any sort of great mystical work alive. No matter whether you're attempting to be a famous rock star or you're attempting to become the most awake, enlightened, conscious person on this planet, you are tied to your hormones as much as the latter is tied to their hormones as much as the former, and that kind of initial excitement, you can't look at it. I'm telling you now, you waste your time. You are being retro-myopic to believe that at one time you had a kind of excitement that the spirit of adventure, of mystical hunger was in you, and in some way you've lost your way. Sure, you've lost your way. You're dying. But to believe that you have lost your way in some sort of metaphysical aspect may or may not be true. Now, it can be on top of it, which I'm about to get to. But the first thing that happened is your hormones began to weaken. You reached your peak, and it began to naturally go down. It does in everybody. Everyone knows it. They describe it in different ways according to what particular shall we say, general they are in life. Athletes know that they have a physical peak. There's no way they can fight it off. Weightlifters know it. Bodybuilders know it. Runners know it. Ballerinas know it. Opera singers know it. That there is a peak, and no matter what they do after that, nothing will bring it back. They simply know it. They don't necessarily call it hormonal, and that's not even the point of what you call it. They just know that there is a peak that is reached one time, never again to be had. Those who get involved with the mystical, even if they're calling it spiritual or something else, seem to, as on a whole, which serves a good purpose, I might point out to in general, but as a whole, never take that into consideration. If anything, they suffer more guilt in the diminution of what apparently was the fever that they felt upon their initial entree, or their initial theoretical entree into the spiritual, metaphysical world. The little news item that I wrote tonight is I said that there's a kind of excitement at 20, and then at 30 it shifts. It's where if someone does continue this, and let's say that they are not able to abandon their ordinary life, or they do not, and they do not go into a monastic situation, that they continue to live out a fairly routine life while simultaneously attempting to discover the secret, to awaken their consciousness, to expand their consciousness, whatever term they happen to find and adopt. After that initial age that I was representing as 20, not just putting into stages in that news item, and said by 30, what they had done is moved on to a more focusing of their search. Because by that time the initial excitement is gone, and whether you had found some apparent living teacher or system or whatever, whether you're just continuing to read, it seemed as though you could now more focus your attention, which what happened is that hormonal excitement was dying down, and you're beginning to put on some years. 30 doesn't seem like much, but you're no longer a teenager. You're no longer that horny for sex or for mysticism or for running or for success or to find the lost chord. Then, as I put it, by the age of 40, it seemed as though it shifted now and you were more determined in your search, which is kind of an expansion of the focusing that now it's as though people go, they continue to sort of reassure themselves that I am on the right path and I will continue this and I'll follow the rules. And by then, usually they are irretrievably part of some sort of organization, whether it be a church or whether it be one of the identifiable so-called mystical disciplines. They have joined some Sufi school, or they swear that they're part of some particular Zen line or whatever it is. And so then it seems as though, well, I am more determined. I am no longer a child. I am now more mature. I have now greater experience, and I'm able to discern. In one sense, that is not mere cynicism. In one sense, this is like to compensate for the lack of the initial excitement. It is a kind of compensation for their realization that I am not near as excited. Here it is 20 years now. As far as I can tell, they don't look at it this way, certainly, but some of you already recognize it before I say it. It is as though they have a recognition that my dreams of what would be to be more conscious, to be enlightened, to be awake, my dreams of it when I first heard about it when I was 18, I am no closer to having experienced it than of what I dreamed it to be. Here it is 20 years later than I was then. But here it is, you spent 20 or 30 years of your life involved with it, so you got to say something, or you have to do something, and what you do is you feel as though, well, I am zeroing in. I am at least now getting a bit more mature. I'm not as helter-skelter in my thinking. I'm not as flimsy and wishy-washy. I can now sort of bear down and really devote my attention a little more, and I'm sure I'm getting somewhere. And then, as I said, by the age of 50, most people had just joined the ranks of the living dead. I was a bit kinder, plus trying to avoid, for your benefit, stepping into those kind of cliches. I said by the age of 50, most people had simply joined the ranks of the resigned and defeated. No big deal. It's not any sort of It's not worthy of much comment. All it is you have, no matter what you might be saying, using you now generically, no matter what you may proclaim otherwise, no matter that you're still on Saturdays or sometimes dressing up in robes and putting funny marks on your face and worshiping in a shrine. In other words, doing something that overtly shows that you are part of some mystical pursuit. But regardless of that, you have given up as much. You are as close to being nearly dead as almost anyone else on the street. You have been laid to rest. You're nearly dead. You've been laid out. But you're still walking around alive, I understand. And it's of no consequence, but if it makes you feel any better, such people may have lived a bit longer neurally than the average. But still, by the age of 50, almost, and I'm talking about people that you would go to a monastery right now, if you still have some dreams that there is a really alive, whole bunch of really wide awake, or by God, on the verge of being enlightened people in a school somewhere, in a cave, in a monastery, if you went there and you found what you thought it was, the one that you had in mind, if you got in there, find everybody in there at the age of 50, and I don't care that it's there, it's not going to be that much different than it is right out here on the street of somebody attempting to do this sort of thing more or less on their own, just to compare it. But they're in the monastery. You find the cats 50 years old, by then they're the head guys, more or less. They are as dead as everybody else out on the street. I guess if we were playing ordinary games, somebody could say, well, how do you know that? How do you know that? They're still there. Oh. I know he tried to play like he got something out of that. There is no proof needed. I shouldn't have wasted our time with that. I'm just telling you that by the age of 50, they're going to be as resigned and defeated as everyone else. You might also note, if you'd care to right quick, throughout history, even until today, every now and then someone will attempt to verbalize this, but even without the vocal description, it works operationally. That is, it takes about the age of 50 before life allows somebody in any position of authority. It's almost impossible. It's the exception. It always makes the news if someone gets elected prime minister or president of some country. Someone reaches a high position of authority, not through their own efforts. It's got to be somewhere that's sort of a representation of the collective, or in the church, any church. It's about the age of 50, and if they ever question about it, as I said, it happens this way, and then after the fact, if it ever opens itself up to any theoretical discussion, it's always sort of on the basis that, well, it takes, by God, a half a lifetime or a good 50 years for even a good Catholic, for a cardinal, for somebody to even aspire to the papal throne, just to use that, or for somebody to aspire to the presidency of Norway. That, I mean, there's certainly some people right here in our parliament, there's some people in the church, there's some 30-year-old men that, I mean, they have a great future. They have great minds, they have great promise, but we're talking, if you're not 50, you're just not hardly fit to actually take over a position of authority. It takes that kind of aging. It takes that kind of wisdom that only comes with age. It all sounds fine because it fits. The mind makes anything fit. We've been through that in case you've never noticed. Well, I gave you one tonight that was pointing out another view of the confinement of the binary construction of man's mental expectations. It's the same thing I'm talking about now, whether you can catch it or not, and it said that some prophecies are said to be self-fulfilling, but in fact, all of them that aren't are. I thought you were going to turn it up to high. Allegro, presto. Not El Drago. Not retardo. The mind makes everything fit, except that which doesn't fit, and then of course that goes in the category of things that don't fit. And there you are. In life, apparently it takes a good, again, it's not a magical time or magical number, but at least the age of 50 In the case of popes, for instance, I'm not an expert, but I'm just thinking surely they're all well within their 70s before anybody ever gets elected. That's in modern times, since back when the popes did it the way real life old male wolves used to. They simply killed the present pope and took over. But at any rate, if you find somebody still involved with this, more or less by the age of 50, you're normally going to find somebody that is simply a follower, a joiner, or as the Southern Baptists call it, a bench warmer. And they may be a bench warmer in a Zen monastery that doesn't even have heat. And they may be sitting on a cold stone. Well, if they're age of 50, they don't have to sit every day. They're in charge of making sure the younger ones sit. But still, they are, apparently, their life being devoted to this. And they're in there, they're wearing the robes, they got all of the trappings of the search. They're in a position now, the monastery has, let's say, 100 young monks sitting. And I say young, less than 50, still sitting. Then there are 3 or 4 that seem to be running the place that are well over 50. And they're treated by the 200 younger ones with great reverence, deference. They're treated as though they're somebody. They act in sort of a semi-humble way, as though they're somebody. But there it is. Within that context, what I'm telling you, they are as dead. They are as resigned. They are as defeated. And as I said, I know that that's a little harsh, as I wanted to make the point and then back up. It's simply that they are now part of the ordinary mainstream. That they intellectually, I know may call it spiritual, but you know by now, that up here, they are as neurally resigned to their fate as everyone else. The only difference is, they're wearing the robes, they're living there in the monastery, and they talk a certain talk whenever they do talk. But they are resigned. Now, if that be true, which it do be true, look what you're faced with, in case any of you, which I say you again generically, because I know how common it is that people think, they think, well, I've been reading and studying this and listening to people like you talk and reading books, but by God, if my life had been such that I could have gone away to India or Mongolia or somewhere and joined a secret monastery and devoted my life 24 hours a day to becoming more conscious, to reaching a state of awakened awareness, by now it would have been a done deed. Don't you bet on it. And that's a nice story. And it can't be disproven. I'm not trying to disprove it, and I'm not trying to make anybody feel bad, nor am I trying to make you feel good or to compensate for the fact that you didn't do it. It's just all irrelevant. Because it's only fools, it's only children dream about what might have been, how it might have been different, and I'm here to tell you that it couldn't have been any different than it was in your life. Until you know it could have been different, and then when you know that, you can also look back for 1 second and go, oh, and that's that. Then there's nothing else to say about, well, could that have been different or not? Can you fill in your own? My God, it's a rock. Well, what's that got to do with being more awake? Well, I don't know. Other people, you point out a rock to them and they won't discuss it for sometimes 10 years. Or, well, yeah, it's a rock, but what else? I'm insinuating the man who knows anything, you think, well, what else has a rock got to be? What the hell do you want? Which again is being kind of silly, because the whole idea of being wired up to be a mystic is that you do see all of life. If you're good at all when you start out with, you begin to see all of life as a metaphor. That there is a secret message. It is. And that's one of the things that keeps a would-be mystic going, is they can hold on to that kind of feeling of awe and mystery about life longer than everybody else. No matter how long, but at least a little longer before they actually give in and die. But it's like the old story that they start out seeing a rock's a rock, and then they begin to see a rock as a metaphor, and then you find out the secret of life, and if you look at a rock at all without thinking about it, the only thing you see then is the rock's a damn rock. But what I was trying to say is, if that was said publicly, an ordinary person would go, well, what's the point? You mean it took you 50 years? You mean that's what you call being more conscious, is to look at a rock and go, well, it's a rock. And the person says, well, hell, I knew that. And of course you know that, and you know what they mean, and you wouldn't go any further, but here's what it amounts to, is what you would want them to. If we were going to do it overtly, then what you do is say, they say, you mean it took you 50 years, and you're saying that a great example of being enlightened is you look at that rock and you say that that's a rock. And you go, yeah. And they go, and it took you 50 years to do that. I can do that already. And the truth is they can't. The truth is you couldn't, and you know it. That is, you cannot look at a rock and see just a rock. You see everything else in the world. Because not just to see a rock, that's just to give an external example. Can you think of one thing and only think of that, and that's it? Well, sure I can. Well, no, you didn't. Well, I can do that. Now, if you could do that, you wouldn't have answered. What the hell does that mean? Well, see, you're getting even worse. When you put on that level, it becomes even more potentially self-strangling than it does as when I was using the rock and such as that, because that seems to be something real rather than just running your mind around in circles. So it helps for a minute, since some of you seem that you're about to get something. If such a conversation were worthwhile between two people, and if you're good, you can do it all inside your own mind, would be somebody to say, in response to what I just said, that they could say, you mean that the whole point of this being enlightened, or being a Buddha mind, being of an expanded state of awareness, of consciousness of life, or of knowing the secret, you're saying that a prime example, a worthwhile example would be to say that you can look at a rock and say, well, that's a rock. And I say, well, yeah, that's about it. They go, what the hell is that? Are you crazy? I can do that. The ordinary mind cannot do that. It can do that, but then it does something else. Because what they should be asking, and they can't do it, they're saying, you mean that the whole point of being more conscious is that you can look at a rock and see a rock as only being a rock. Now they're getting somewhere. But the mind is not thinking that way. Who's going to ask that question? Who would even think? I mean, it doesn't make much sense to say, you mean that to be more conscious is to see a rock, yeah, and you realize it's a rock, yeah. But what you're saying is you just see a rock and that's all you see is just that rock, yeah. That they can't do. And I say they, now back to you, the ordinary mind cannot do that. It's not equipped to do that. That's not its point. Man would not be where he is now if the mind did not look at a rock and go, I could hit Fred with that rock and take away his food. Or, look at the way that thing shines. I bet I could whittle that thing up and shine it up and stick it in some kind of holder and sell it as jewelry. Or, I could sit on that. I could make a chair out of that. That is the normal workings of the mind. Now going from that kind of very crude example into that which makes it harder to talk about, is what I said is anything that the mind does, anything it thinks about. It cannot think about just that. From that flows the many mystical disciplines which all work on the same premise of attempting to take this river that flows through everyone. That once you sit in a certain way, it's sort of like out of control. Ordinary people don't think about it that way. They only do when they feel it's out of control to the point that it's detrimental to their ordinary health. That's when people believe, well, I've got mental problems, I have phobias, I have fixations of my mind that are beginning to drive me a little around the bend. I need help. It's not that kind of sickness. It's that kind of uncharted middle ground that would-be mystics, those wired to do it, can handle, that they find it to be eventually. It may have to be pointed out to them in some way, but as soon as it is, they realize, all right, what's just flowing through me normally? They may start thinking, well, I talk too much, I ramble too much, my mind just skitters around, I can't hold my focus. And as soon as it's pointed out in some way, if they hear that the great mystical methods have been, or some of the disciplines have been, to try, no matter what's going on in your mind, to always picture the face of Buddha, to always picture some letter of the Hindu alphabet, some Sanskrit letter, to repeat the name of God over and over, no matter what's going on. That, as soon as they hear that, even if they'd never thought why, even if they had never heard my kind of stories about rivers flowing through these wondrous kingdoms, and that some of the people eventually decided it would be a good thing, it would be to their advantage to build levees, to build dikes, dams, to direct and control the flow of this river. As soon as men wired up to be mystics hear about any of these methods, any of these disciplines, meditation, but generally it comes down to, make it simple, I've done it over and over, is a man's mental energy is like a river. The mind is just running on. It is where life, at the instinctive level, of course, down in the sex organs, life is reproducing itself as strong as you will ever experience it, or there's nothing any stronger. But then in man, you have another outlet. You move on up the nervous system, and you've got man's mind. It is not a finished product. Life continues to reproduce itself in a non-physical way, or in a non-instinctive way, in a non-physical way. As such, technology, science, is to the mind as babies are to the sex organs. It is life reproducing itself at another level. Not better, not worse, it's just in another level. And it is a more exotic, it is a less tangible area than physically, because anybody, the least conscious person on this planet, idiots, literal idiots, people with brain damage, can screw and get each other pregnant the same way as dogs and elephants can. So anybody, in a sense, can reproduce sexually another human being, which life needs, which life drives, is what makes sex so exciting and so powerful. But through man, at least on this planet, anything that's four-dimensionally observable, man can reproduce in another way, which is what I normally refer to as just progress, manifested technically. It is everything outside the mere physical world of sexual reproduction, the mere level of survival. Anything beyond that is like mental sexual reproduction. When a would-be mystic first hears that there have been these methods that attempt to make the mind focus on one thing, and rather than worry about sitting there meditating for 20 or 30 years, I'm just saying it's a walking around meditation. The simple way to put it is that, just for instance, I'm not saying one's better than another, but to try and picture the face of Buddha, picture the face of Lao throughout your life. That's all you attempt to do. There are many people, they hear that and they go, yes. There usually comes a period of some years later or sometime that they need more. But at first they can hear it and it doesn't make any sense particularly. In other words, they're not a Buddhist. They start reading, or let's say that they just stumble across a book on mystical aspects of Islam. They begin to read about the so-called Sufi saints, and they find out that there is a school that's been going on that claimed for thousands of years, one of the big ones, that was centered around a poet named Rumi. And they say that the real secret is the students inside the school, those in the know, they have this drawing, they have a sketch of the master Rumi and what they attempt to do, regardless of what else. They may be pursuing external, some sorts of Islamic, they may be observing certain Islamic customs, etc. They say, well, what they're really doing, what they teach, is that they continue, that their attempt is to continually picture in their mind that sketch. They get to see it one time. If they're really good, if they decide that they're open to it, they get to go into a secret chamber inside the school, and whoever's the head monk at that time, he shows them that sketch. And he tells them, here's what we do. I'm going to tell you the beginning of it and the end of it. Don't ask me any questions. I'm never going to mention it. You've been selected to do this. What you attempt to do, this does not belie any other, this does not deny any other teaching that we may come up with that you may hear later. But here's what I'm telling you. You've been one of the ones chosen. In addition to anything else we may ever direct you to do, is what we attempt to do, those inside here, the inner circle, is we attempt with every mental moment, asleep and awake. You have to work on it, but I'm telling you, as we attempt to hold this sketch of Rumi in our mind, regardless of anything else, do you understand? And you go, well, yeah, what's not to understand? They close the book and say, it's never mentioned again. That is as good as any. Now, I could use Moses or anybody. What you're attempting to do is to take this flow that, in one sense, is it's not equitable to the sex drive, but that's why I went to it. I assume you do understand it is a reproductive outlet for life, but at another level. That it has all the other creatures from insects to mammals to man sexually reproducing. So physical life is going on quite well. The race continues to reproduce itself. All creatures on this planet do, as long as life wants them. But life, through man, is reproducing itself at another level, coming out here. And as soon, ordinary people, it doesn't mean a lot. The best they get with it is education or some form of mental discipline. If you're going to become a doctor, if you're going to become a neurosurgeon, you've got to pay attention in class. You cannot sleep through med school like you did high school. You cannot sleep through law school the way you did high school. You have to pay attention. You have to be able to study. You have to be able to force yourself to concentrate in certain areas. That's about the best they do, because you can tell anybody that it's good if you have some power of concentration, if you have some control over your attention. People, oh yeah. But as soon as would-be mystics hear something about that the whole secret, that the secret method, the secret work, that somebody decided to reveal it in a book, and you hear what it is, it's the attempt to hold one idea in mind continually, one picture, one word, one idea. It strikes many people. It has for thousands of years. As soon as they hear it, they go, that's it. They can almost close the book. They have to walk it. It may take them weeks to get over it. They go, that's it. Well, why did I? That's it. They just know it's it. You can listen to someone talk, not excluding yours truly. Or you could read other people's writings forever. And it can get to such a point, especially tied in with the fact that you get past the age, as I said, of your 20s or so, and the hormonal. And by hormonal, you understand I'm speaking sexually. But I just didn't want to, it's more than that, but it's that you're past that peak and the excitement of being alive begins to diminish. You will begin to accept stories. You'll begin to accept dreams. That's why, if you didn't notice, I stick in news items all the time about passengers on trains and how you can end up believing you're kind of bouncing along and you might as well be on a Hollywood set and they got the train seats kind of shaking and somebody going, woo, woo. And you think, well, I'm getting somewhere. Why else would I be here? Why else would I hear this? If it's not having some effect, it's not your fault and it's not my fault when I say if it's not. If you're not in some way a different person, then it's not being done correctly. You're not doing it correctly, or you can say I'm not, but you're not. You're missing it. You're getting distracted. And I go on for many, many, many nights, long periods of time. I never mention anything specifically. But it is right there. It is your mind just running. It is the energy of life. It is similar to the sex energy of life. That is why it is so powerful in men. Mm. And it can last longer than even the sex drive, which is not really the point, but what I want you to understand is that it is very important to life. It is the power, the energy that flows through man's mind is grossly underestimated by individuals. Now, in general it is, or I can make some comment, or some ordinary man can say, look at the civilizations of man. Look at what man hath wrought through the mind. And it's a fact. And civilized, educated people say, by God, that's true. Were it not for our minds, we'd be nothing. We're certainly not the strongest of creatures. We're not the fastest of creatures on this planet. We can't fly. We can't swim half as well as an alligator. We can't climb trees like a sloth. We have one thing. This is what has produced the glory that is man, the glory that is civilization. Yes, yes, yes. But individually, men do not give true value. They do not have the full recognition of the power of this. People know that humans will rape each other. People know that they will commit crimes through sex, the urging of sex. That is, it is just so strong. That's why people has always been prohibitions against it, and the adult world's always worried about teenagers going to get out of hand. Everybody understands that the sex drive is about as strong as it comes. But they underestimate this, because what I was going to point out, it's not to prove anything, but I want you to consider the power of it that you don't normally do. This is not the norm, but it's not unheard of for a man to be at such an age, or a man or a woman, but it's easier to describe a man, he is such an age that he could not perform sexually if he wanted to. He is irreversibly, physically impotent. He cannot get it up again, and yet he can still be mentally alive. That is not unheard of, and the point I'm trying to make is that this is extremely important, and it is more powerful, the potential of it, than individuals give credit to in themselves. They can look out and agree that, yeah, the mind of man is powerful. Oh, it sent rockets to the moon, to outer space. It's done this and that with technology. But individually, people just, it's like something flowing through them. And only a few people can ever hear that you say, this is like a mighty river. It is like something that if it was diverted, or if it was put under some control, it could be a very good thing. And they hear, yes, it could. And almost without exception, it's just a predictable flow of events. That within a period of years, a short period of time, they have less and less excitement about it. I could make if this was a sermon, which it wasn't, I could make another one pointing out the difficulty in stirring up excitement. The closest I did was tonight was point out that it's awfully hard to get the dead excited. To go out in the cemetery and stir up any. You can take bass drums and fireworks and whistles and put on a funny hat, but it's difficult. Also for those neurally deceased, especially for those. The problem with trying to, if you were doing it yourself, to keep it going on some kind of large scale is to keep that kind of enthusiasm. Now, but the easy way, of course, if you're following this, would be to only try and appeal to try to find your audience amongst people 17 to 22, more or less. And then as soon as they reach 30 or so, and you realize, well, this is getting to be more trouble than it's worth. I'm going to have to go around and beat everybody all the time, make them feel guilty. Maybe I do have to show up continuing a funny hat and a bass drum and fireworks, but only that. After you do it a few times, it takes more and more and more, and you think, well, screw it. And you go back and get more and more teenagers. There is an excitement. The excitement sexually, to compare the two again, is natural. That if you are just an ordinary healthy person, you don't have to increase your sexual excitement. I mean, if you're at the right age and you get horny, how much horny do you want to be? You don't want to be horny, or you want relief, you want satisfaction. There is a similar kind of power here, and it can go on longer, except you end up, and you can do something about it. Which, as I said, is not a perfect parallel, but sexually, by all reports, you finally reach an age that your hormones are gone. There's nothing you can do about it. The testosterone in men is gone, and in women, estrogen, you're sexually dead. And yet this damn thing can still go. But it does not naturally go any further. Men can still talk, and they still seem to be conscious. But as I pointed out to you many times, you're dying ordinarily. You're dying at about the same rate you're dying sexually. And by the time most people reach age 21 or 22, they've given up. They are resigned as they're supposed to be. That's why I was saying I hate to make it sound harsh, because it's not a condemnation. They're supposed to give up. You're supposed to give these dreams of being somebody, a rock star, a ballerina. You're supposed to get married, get somebody pregnant, or you get pregnant, and have children, and go home. Join a church, go to a political rally, or stay home. But just calm down. To try to do this, the problem of calming down is not the problem. The problem is in calming down.